So just start by telling us a little bit about your career background, your education, and how you came to do the type of medicine that you practice today.
Sure. I'm Habib Sadeghi. I'm a family doctor, and I got sick. I initially wanted to become a neuro-ophthalmologist, and once I got sick, it just completely shifted and changed everything for me. So I decided to be jack of all trade and master of none, and family practice was what I focused on. And after finishing my residency program, I started a master's program in spiritual psychology with a fellowship in consciousness, health, and healing. And since then, I've had over 800 hours of being mentored by a dean of Psychoanalytical Institute, where pretty much twice a week, I review all the cases of the patients that they come in to see what is the emotional basis of what they're going through. So that's who I am and what I do.
It's amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal story of the diagnosis that you got in medical school and how that woke you up to kind of self-healing?
Yeah, I was second year medical school. I found a lump in my left testicle, and it just turned out to be cancerous. And this was during the time period where Scott Hamilton nearly died, the gold skater. Lance Armstrong got testicular cancer, lost part of his lungs, part of his brain, and so it was scary. Initially, I was very frightened. And even though I was relatively very well versed in the language and the medical arena, but still, going to City of Hope and being bombarded with percentages of 70% chance of metastasis and 4 cycles of chemotherapy, it was very contracting. And one of the things that I lost very, very early on was this space inside that I refer to as clarity or mental space. And so I took some time off medical school and to really work with that and to choose from a place of spaciousness. And for me, what it meant was not to really be filleted open. 16-hour procedures referred to as retroperitoneal lymphadenectomy. And I walked away. I didn't do chemotherapy. That's not something that I would recommend for everyone. For me at the time, that was the right decision. And I did it differently. I started traveling. I started paying attention to what I eat. I started practicing yoga and being more reflective. And I went on this emotional archaeological digging, if you would, to see, well, where did this come from? I mean, could it be that my biography might have contributed, if not caused, the biology that I was working with, which was cancer? And it just opened up a whole new realm for me. So that's how it started.
That's amazing. And that's what you apply in your work now, which I think is so important. I love when you say your biography indicates or dictates your biology.
Yeah.
So how do you practice that with your patients? I mean, there's so many emotions, and emotional trauma and past wounds are so complex, right? How do you sit down with a patient? And I feel like when I've sat with you, you are intuitively tap into what's going on emotionally. So can you just explain, because I feel like medicine needs to go in your direction, where it's just holistic. You're taking in their whole biography, their stress, their emotional past, their relationships, their diet. So can you just explain how you operate and work with a patient?
Yeah. There's a mindset, there's a modus operandi that I've developed, and that's what I really share with patients. And when they come in, I talk about a triangle that I believe that most human beings are caught in, and this this is actually the centerpiece. You may have seen it. The triangle is that of a perpetrator, and the victim, and then waiting for the rescuer. And I've realized that this is a triangle that somewhere along the line, during our childhood, or definitely in my childhood, this took shape, where usually one parent becomes the perpetrator. You didn't do your homework. Why did you do it this way? Why did you do that? You were a bad boy. You should have not done that. You know. So then we go into the position of being a child, being helpless, being a victim. And then we're waiting for the other parent to come and rescue us. And you know what? I think, out of 7.85 billion people on the planet, perhaps most of us, we really are caught in this triangle and we're not even, aware of it. But the issue with the triangle is that it's one-dimensional and it's flat and it doesn't really give us space. So one of the things that I usually create is, look, there is a triangle, but is there a way that you could observe it from up here? And once we do that, now all of a sudden we have a three-dimensional structure and we create what's referred to as mental space or clarity. It's a larger cup and we're able to go through our lives and to be reflective and to really heal and to apply loving to places inside that they're hurting. And, I went through medical school. I did residency, I did fellow. I've never really learned that. That is not included, and it's not integrated in our medical model. And the problem with that model is that it creates various different approaches when it comes to a medical challenge. Let's say a person comes in and they're dealing with cancer or a neurological issue such as Parkinson's disease, MS, or an autoimmune disease where their body is attacking itself. I've noticed that they could approach it just like a victim, just like a baby. And what they embody is there's no engagement. They want the other person to do it for them, you see. That's the babyhood approach of a crisis or an obstacle or a limit. From the perspective, the mathematical concept of a limit is something that you approach, not something you shy away from. And then there are people that they come in, and I refer to them as the teenagehood. That's where they're stuck. They come in and, F cancer, I'm gonna fight it. Not me, I'm gonna do it my way. And they're completely against traditional medicine. Rebelling. And that's when we need to have a conversation. That are you aware that what you're bringing forward, the aggressivity that you're bringing forward, it's sort of like adding petroleum to the fire that you're working with. That might not really be healing for you. Mm-hmm. And then we have the third category of thinking adults, adulthood, that they come in and they want a double-blinded, placebo-controlled study of how do I know that modality is going to work. They go read about the entire physiology. They go through their favorite search engines. So they're trying to think through their healing. And obviously that's limited. And then there's a category that I refer to them as, if you would, old agehood. They come in and it's completely opposite of the teenagehood. Instead of aggressivity, they have passivity. This is too much. I don't know if I can do this. And they're just ready to give up. And there's somewhere along the line where the artist in them needs to be inspired, where they really integrate the babyhood, the teenagehood, the thinking adult, and the old agehood. Now they're an artist. They realize that they're looking at what they're going through from up here. And that's when the magic occurs. Because now what they have is mental space that they can be creative, they can partner. It could be traditional medical model. It could be a person who practices integrative medicine. It could be, journaling a certain way that allows them access to be able to reflect back. For me, years of child abuse that I had, shoved underneath the carpet. And I went back And I really sat with that little boy, what it was like. And there's no question in my mind, I have a visceral experience that, if not caused, but contributed to my physiology of testicular cancer. So that's really the medical model that I share with patients, that I have the privilege of serving.
I love that. It's the one-dimensional triangle. It's like the disease is to blame. I am the victim. I need to find a doctor who will save me and do the work for me, or the pill, or the surgery.
Right.
And passively sit there and complain.
Right.
But then you're adding the third dimension, which opens up a whole nother realm of possibilities in healing. I love that.
Yeah, and I really, watching heal, that's what I took away. It wasn't about againstness. It was a very probiotic way of approaching life and a limit. The limit could be having a very difficult relationship. It doesn't necessarily have to be a medical challenge, a terminal cancer. It could be chronic pain, right? But if there is a way that, as an artist, you're not antibiotic, you're not anti-life, you're very probiotic, you're for life. And once you do that, the creativity opens up, you see. Then healing becomes a verb. It becomes an ontological experience that you cannot think, intellectualize your way through it, because you're living it.
Beautiful. So you wrote the book, The Clarity Cleanse.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us, the 7.85 billion, we weren't raised with a way to express emotions in a healthy way. A lot of us are very scared of feeling, which is why people numb their feelings with antidepressants, opioids, alcohol, cigarettes, sex, whatever it is. So do you help people learn to express it in a healthy way? Like, how do you help people heal emotional trauma and express moving forward?
Yeah. I think the closest thing that I have the privilege of holding a space for another human being is for them to be touched, moved, and inspired to actually live. Because I think dis-ease and suffering is an important part of being alive. When you look at the second noble truth, the first noble truth, to live is to suffer. See, so this idea that we're supposed to have a very comfortable life, and we're supposed to have this protection, and we shouldn't really suffer. I'm not sure if that's an artist's way of living. It might be a very passive way. It might be a different way of being. But I think the way that I look at a disease, and I know this for myself, that was the case, it's an awakening. It's an awakening the way that acorn gets planted, goes through that dark night of the soul, and then it needs to break open and to germinate and sprout out and to give birth to an oak tree, which is completely different. And all it takes to create that future forest is one acorn. One acorn. It takes one practitioner that says, wow, wait a minute, I have this particular patient that repeatedly comes in and they have urinary tract infections, or they have a recurrent yeast infection. Well, I wonder why that is. And they could start asking open-ended questions that would encourage patients to be self-reflective instead of being deflective. It's like, wow, well, what is it like? Is there a particular pattern to when you get, your urinary tract infections? Something as simple as that. Based on anthroposophical medicine, we actually believe that consciousness precedes phenotypic expression, that the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the collection of all, which we refer to as consciousness, comes before a phenotypic expression such as a disease, such as urinary tract infection. So the same person, if they feel that their space is being invaded, their mother-in-law is traveling and coming to visit them, and if they feel invaded, then the way that it gets manifested, it's urinary tract infection. But if we don't ask, And if we're not reflective, then it's so easy to just keep putting people on antibiotic. And what are we doing? We're destroying the complete microbiome that is giving birth to the whole field of endocrinology. Now we know that there is a field called microbial endocrinology, that the very microbes that we host inside us, trillions of them, far more than we have genetic makeup and cell, we have bacteria, we have, inside, and they're creating this incredible symphony that's called healing. So where do we start? We ask open-ended questions. We encourage patients to approach their life from a place of being an artist, instead of being a baby or being against anything or wanting to intellectualize everything. Now you open up and you feel that, well, there is such a thing as intuition. But in order to do that, you cannot be running at 120 miles and expect intuition to appear. You got to create this spaciousness to slow down and to be reflective and to slow down the brain so that we can have access to our own heart. And perhaps that's when the mystery reveals itself.
So basically you're saying symptoms, illness, disease shows up in the body, conditions, and it's a conversation that your body's trying to tell you. It's feedback, right?
Yes.
And we're not, we need to learn that language of the body. Mm-hmm. I know in Chinese medicine, they sometimes associate different emotions with different organ systems. Can you talk a little bit about patterns you've seen with emotions and certain conditions? Like I know in your book, you said something about anger and resentment, often tied to cancer. Are there, just in case someone's watching and they have a condition, mm-hmm. Any patterns that you see that might wake them up to, oh my gosh, maybe that's what that condition's telling me?
Yeah, that's a great inquiry. I think there's this French author and a philosopher that said, answering the question is killing the question, which is really true. I think what I would like to leave with your viewers is from a place of humility, is to ask more questions of themselves, to really be more reflective. It is true that when we look at systemic medical models, such as Ayurvedic medicine, such as traditional Oriental medicine, that there are certain organs that they hold and they process certain emotions. So it's not far-fetched to see someone that if they're going through grief, it might manifest itself as an issue, a pathology in their lungs. It could be acute bronchitis or inflammation of the bronchi or so forth. Or a person that's dealing with chronic frustration and anger, they might have some issues with their liver. Okay, there's one organ in the body that you will never see a primary cancer in, and that is spleen. See, spleen is the site that holds all the immune cells, white blood cells, and various different things. And it's always fascinating when you look at the patterns in the body and you see the connection that they have. And within a systemic medical approach, there are organs that they're responsible to, they're the exit organs, if you would. These are the organs that they clean out things, organs such as, for instance, lungs, colon, kidneys. They produce, feces, they get rid of bile, they produce urine, the CO2, and so forth. So the most important thing is to take a look, and if there is a recurrent infection, that anyone, they keep getting that. They could ask questions. For me, it was, well, why the left side? Why left testicular cancer? Why not the right side? And then I started reflecting and realizing that there is a laterality to human body, that one side has more receptors and that's responsible for a certain level of hormones that usually are associated with the feminine side, the receiver side, versus the masculine side or the giver side. So these are I'm hoping that this would create an initial mental space for people to start asking questions and inquiring. And one of the things that has worked empirically with patients that I've had the privilege of working with is to encourage them to do what I refer to as, dream incubation. They get a notepad and they put it by their bed, and they're very clear. And whether they say a prayer or they set an intention that as they're going through sleep, they're requesting their higher self or subconscious universe, Father, Mother, God, beloved friend, this ocean that we've been born to and we're swimming in like a fish in a sea. For them to have a very direct sign through sleep that would help them, and it would reveal why is it that they're going through a particular challenge. 9 out of 10, the next day, patients, when they wake up and they just start writing, their dream, they're very revelatory, and they'll find the answers. And see, and that's really the beauty of this way of practicing medicine, because it becomes an art. See, it's an art of healing. It's practice of medicine. See, the idea, which I truly believe that it's not accurate and it's very limited, is to think that simply because someone has done a double-blinded, placebo-controlled study, and it might say so in that textbook, then everyone else should fit that medical model. I think that's limiting. I think opening things up, engaging patients as human beings who have the disease instead of they have the disease, they're the disease. See, when we look at the menu and we order the food, we don't eat the menu, you see? So the disease is a revelatory process that it's engaging us to awaken, to come out of our babyhood or teenagehood or old agehood or thinking intellectualized adulthood. And it's inviting us into a whole new way of being an artist through our own healing.
Amazing. So talk to me about love. I know you have the love button. Mm-hmm. And I love Rumi's quote that, seek not to find love, but to find the barriers that you put up between love, paraphrasing there. Yeah. So talk to me about the power of love when it comes to healing.
It's everything. It's what saved my life. It's the reason that I'm alive. I talk about it in the book, Declare to Cleanse, that, when I came back from Loma Linda University and where the initial diagnosis was made, I was so overwhelmed. I was living in a triangle. I felt that cancer was the perpetrator, I was the victim, and I was looking for a rescuer. And I knew that my parents would not have the faculty and the capacity to be able to contain me. So I went back to medical school. I went to the anatomy lab, and my anatomy partner, Gary, and I told him, I said, I'm not doing well. And he said, let's go get lunch. And we went to this Mexican restaurant, and we were sitting there. And through the conversation, what Gary did, now I know that he was able to contain me. He was able to really hold space, that I could really face my fear, the parts of me that they were baby and felt like I can't do this, the part of me that felt really passive, the parts of me that wanted to just think my way through it and kept asking, why me, what caused this? He was able to hold all of it. And when we walked away, I was a completely transformed person. And that's what I usually share with patients, that, healing doesn't take place in a pill. Healing doesn't take place because it doesn't need to take 4 years. Healing can occur just in a moment if you are open, if you are receptive. And it doesn't need to come from a person that wears a long white coat and has more initial than the alphabets in their name. Healing occurs. The true healers could be our four-legged friends, that we could really love and receive and accept. See, healing can occur by just you're pulling off the freeway and someone is holding a sign. And for the first time, you may have seen them and tried to look away and not look at them. But for the first time, you look at them and you get this sense of giving a bottle of water. And what that creates, it's a mental space. It's a place which is a pyramid. That space for me is loving. Loving is really a verb. And that's what shifted and changed everything. Gary looked me straight in the eye and he said, "He who hasn't loved hasn't known God yet, for God is love." Wow, all of a sudden I realized, it just dawned on me that I wasn't being punished. Now there was a shift. The God of my understanding, which was a punitive God, it became a loving God. When we walked back to medical school, I was walking taller because I knew that I was going to be okay. That even if they would have called and says, we're going to take both testicles, I just knew that I was going to be all right. So I had, if you would, a mental space, a pyramid, and that was the dimension that I was able to really work through, and it's been such a privilege, and it's been, what a journey. And, if I were to go back, I wouldn't change a thing. Every single moment of it, because of my receptivity, it's been an awakening. And I truly believe that disease has a role. It's not a punitive act because we've done something wrong. We haven't done meditation enough. We haven't done yoga enough. We haven't eaten organic food enough. We haven't taken supplements enough. Or we had a little bit of gluten. That is not how I look at disease. I look at disease as an awakening for a new entelechy to occur. For the acorn to become the oak tree, it needs to go through a process. And I think our physical challenges, sometimes they play that role. Sometimes it could be our relationship. But when you look at that, then there's a poetry in it. See, and the artistry comes out. And there is a particular quality that gets developed. And that quality is what I refer to as negative capability, which was a term coined by John Keats. John Keats actually started his journey as a medical doctor. He was in medical school, but he got tuberculosis. And he dropped out, and he became a poet. And so to be able to develop that mental space of sitting with the mystery of not knowing, not having all the facts, that is where the poetry of healing reveals itself.
That sounds like surrendering to the present moment.
Yes.
Not resisting or fighting what's going on.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Most medical doctors, they don't know this. If you ask them how many cranial nerves we have, they'll say 12. But that's inaccurate. Human beings actually have 13 cranial nerves. And we discovered this in 1847. Most medical textbook, they won't print it. Cranial nerve 0, it comes before cranial nerve 1, which is the olfactory. And I'm here to tell you, cranial nerve 0 is responsible for taking us away from a fight or flight that you just described, and it takes us into a place of rest and rumination. And it's sort of like getting the toothpaste tubes, and the cranial nerve opens the cap. But as long as cranial nerve 0, it's not activated, it's not stimulated and open, no matter how much we squeeze, the only thing that we create is disharmony. Cranial nerve 0, if it's unused, or if the way that the baby is born is, sometimes it's necessary to do C-section or use Pitocin, which is synthetic oxytocin, that could create a dysregulation and deactivates cranial nerve 0. Most human beings on the planet, by the age of 6, the cranial nerve 0 atrophies, it withers away, and it actually sticks to the olfactory bulb. And that's why when you do the dissections, you'll never see it. But most mammals, there is a way of being when we are living in harmony and loving, that you activate and entrain your cranial nerves, which means cranial nerve 0 gets fired, and then 1, and then 2, all the way down to 13. That is when the artist appears. Most human beings are very reactive, and they approach a limit, an obstacle, from a place of contraction because their cranial nerves are dysregulated.
Oh, how do we activate that cranial nerve 0?
Cranial nerve 0 is activated by hormones such as oxytocin. That is, for the most part, when we have sexual activity, oxytocin is released along with relaxin. And that is the highest concentration of oxytocin. So one of the things that I communicate with patients, when they come in and, they've given a diagnosis of cancer or Parkinson's disease or MS, they're so contracted, they're in fear. And the last thing that they would want to focus on is their sexuality. But when you talk about that this is important, this actually activates the cranial nerve 0, which is responsible for revamping your hormones. Oxytocin increases, we know this, oxytocin increases natural killer cells or NK cells. Oxytocin decreases cortisol, the aspect of cortisol that creates, and it's related to stress. The quickest way to change the modality from fight and flight into a place of rest, rumination, and healing is through activation of cranial nerve 0. But you look around and you ask patients, how many times this particular doctor or specialist asks you about your sexual life? No one does. And you can see that, and you can see it right across. Human beings, when cranial nerve 0, it's not activated, when it's shut down, then what they focus on, increasing intensity and time. And that, I believe, that's the root cause of a lot of illnesses in our society, such as pornography, such as a lot of, if you would, alternative lifestyles, where people, they need to increase the intensity in order to feel anything because they're so armored up. You cannot be armored if cranial nerve 0 is activated. If cranial nerve 0 is activated, human beings, all of a sudden, they appear as an artist. And self-responsibility appears. Self-love, self-forgiveness, self-gentility. And my God, we only treat the world the way we treat ourselves. So if we have more loving and gentility and softness and forgiveness for ourselves, all of a sudden, the way that we relate with our beloveds, our children, our four-legged friends, our neighbors, strangers, completely changes. Loving is healing. That's a completely different way of being that opened up, and I started really researching it and implementing it. I'm a family doctor. I'm also a certified sexologist because I truly believe that sex plays an important role as a spiritual healing practice in the dynamic of a person's healing journey.
Amazing. Are there other ways besides orgasm and sex to, because oxytocin's released in meditation, I believe, as well, and
Absolutely.
laughter,
Saffron.
bonding.
They're herbs that they're oxynogenic. They increase your oxytocin, but not to the degree that we're talking about.
Okay.
And I think that there is a reason. Wilhelm Reich, the traditional medical model, they usually refer to him as not so um, um, respectfully, but Wilhelm Reich was the teacher of Morton Herskowitz, who was my teacher. Morton Herskowitz wrote a book called Emotional Armoring. He was the last psychiatrist that was trained by Wilhelm Reich. And in the book, he talks about that. Most human beings are walking around completely armored. And the pattern that they're armored creates the terrain, the soil, if you would, that leads into various different diseases. You know, a person that is armored in the head and neck, what you see is around the eyes, around the jaw. A person who's armored in their upper body, that's where you see it. There are a lot of people that they're armored in the pelvic floor and, you know, they can do whatever they want to do. But if they're contracted, they're not conducive. They don't have the environment that's conducive for fertility. So what do? We force them. We want to force their system instead of realizing that, wow, this person has a tilted uterus that needs to be structurally adjusted and cared for. And then with ease and grace, fertility occurs. You see, this idea of if one medication doesn't work, well, guess what? Take 2, take 3, take 4. Guess what? We're going to add another medication. Let's talk about polypharmacy. That's insane. That really is the definition of insanity. So I feel like the conversation that we're starting is that, wow, is there a gentler way of approaching this incredible process that is an aspect of our evolutionary journey called healing? Human beings, you know, they do better when they know better. And that's really what I feel that the conversation that you're starting is about.
I always like to strengthen people's belief in possibility. The more stories that are shared of someone healing terminal cancer or MS or ALS or Parkinson's, and transforming and transcending that condition, the more people can believe it's possible for themselves. Do you have any inspiring stories that come to mind about something that may seem incurable, but they actually transformed?
Well, absolutely. You're looking at them.
Sure.
I've published my entire medical records in the book from the City of Hope. They gave me 70% chance of metastasis. I mean, I wish I could tell you that back then I had the consciousness that I have now. No, I had sleepless nights, you know, and I go back and I have so much compassion for that 26-year-old that had a complete misunderstanding that he was now broken because he had one testicle, that he wasn't man enough. I have so much compassion for that 26-year-old that, you know, that felt like, oh my God, everyone is telling me that I'm gonna explode, that I can't have children. I have so much compassion for that aspect of myself. You know, that's why I do what I do, because it's a privilege. You want proof? I am the proof. I am the proof that this works. That healing is a journey. It's an endless journey. It's a mountain with no top. You can't get to the top. All you can do is just keep getting better and get back on the trail and just keep going towards it, because you keep healing. And there's a whole field of transgenerational healing where you start realizing that the more that I get to heal of my own limitation, misbeliefs, misunderstanding, misperception, there is less for my son or my daughter to handle. You know, and I think that's perhaps what the good book was talking about in terms of the sin of the fathers and so forth. This is to go on this hike called healing. It's a privilege. So you want proof? You're looking at it. I am the greatest proof, and that's what I usually tell patients, that you can heal. You got to be committed. You got to realize that you can't approach it as a baby or as a teenager that, you know, you're going to defy and you're going to push against. No, you can't, you know, you can't just sit back and want me to carry you, and you cannot intellectualize your way through healing. You got to come into it as an artist, realizing that this is probably one of the greatest masterpieces that life is asking you to partake in. Then miracles occur.
Amazing. I love practical tools you can give people that apply, and one of the ones that you share in your book I've been using, and I feel like it's very helpful, the Pew 12, the Purge Emotional Writing. Can you talk about that and any other tools that people can apply to their lives and get started today?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things is the way we walk. I've noticed that when we walk and our gaze, most people, you notice that as you walk around, look where people are looking. People are looking down.
At their phones.
Or on their phones, gazing down. Something occurs. And what occurs is a shift in the blood flow into the front of the brain. When we lift our gaze up, when we do that, it completely shifts and changes everything for us. And we have the ability to be able to look into the eyes of another human beings, and miracles occur. It's called soul gazing. That's something that anyone can do. There's a way of journaling that I refer to it as purge emotional writing 12 minutes a day. The reason that I call it that is because it sets the intention. The intention is in the name. And I truly believe that intention setting is incredibly important. And everything that I touch, before I came in, before I sat down to do the interview, I set my intention of why am I here? What is the conversation that I want to be a part of? So purged emotional writing, it allows us to have a cocoon where I can, when the kids are running around, I can go to the restroom, lock the door, sit there, and just write. And the question is, how am I feeling? What am I thinking? What are the emotions? What am I feeling in my body? What am I tasting? And usually that opens up and I get to write whatever I want. If there are judgments I'm holding against myself, I get to work with it. If I've had a particular memory, for whatever reason, it's resurfacing, I get to work with it. I truly believe in the adage that what we reveal, we heal. I refer to that, it's almost like a revelation booth or confession booth that you get to be with you. And you get to put it on a paper and you can go into compassionate self-forgiveness. And we can, it's incredible how we take that for granted. When you look at, I spent 6 months, most people, they're unaware, but under Department of Justice, there is a Department of Pardon. And it's usually headed by a JD, an attorney who has a PhD. So if you want someone to be pardoned, you fill out an application and you send it in, and there's a committee that they review it. But I looked at the language that is used. A president of the United States can pardon anybody. By the power invested in me as the president of the United States, Well, gosh, every single day when I come out of the shower, right underneath the shower, I baptize myself. And this is what I say. By the power invested in me, by the power and resources invested in me, I wholeheartedly forgive all my shortcomings. And the new truth that I am subscribing to now is, let me be used as a vessel for that which is for the highest healing for all to occur. And I'll start my day. Purged emotional writing has the ability, it's a modern day technique that really creates a psycho-spiritual hygiene. Just like we take a shower, we can sit there and whatever, if we've had a fight with our partners, if all of a sudden we had a really busy day, sometimes when I come home, every other patient, it's a terminal cancer patient, it's this patient, they have this, before I go back and reacclimate with my family, I take 12 minutes. Do this, I'll take a shower, now I'm fresh. And I can reinitiate and go back into this constellation called the family. I'm a completely different human being. So these are a couple of things that they're very accessible that people can do.
And after the purge,
You always
writing.
burn it.
Yes.
You always burn it. I have found, and I'm researching and writing about this. Purge emotional writing is a way, just like yoga is a way, that activates cranial nerves, okay? That is it increases the oxytocin level. These are tiny little steps that we can do. And you know what I love about this way of approaching healing? That, you know, I look at healing because it's sort of like a huge tanker. It's not a jet ski. You can't just turn it, you know? You can't shift and change things overnight. You can't not just be, you know, a vegan and this and start standing on your head overnight. It takes time. And what I love is a term that Buckminster Fuller introduced me to, and that's what it says on his tombstone. It says, "Call me trim tab." When you look at a ship, all the way in the back, that's where the rudder is. And the rudder, sticking right on the head of the rudder, is a tiny little things that can be moved effortlessly. That's called a trim tab. Healing is not about a giant step. Healing is about a tiny little acupuncture of a trim tab that can make it easier for the rudder to shift. And over a period of time, we get to completely change this huge tanker that's called healing.
Amazing. What is the importance of language in healing?
Language is life. Without language, you can't create anything. You know, their language gives us the tools, and we're very unique mammals. That you and I, we're sitting here, and we're creating sounds and phonation that actually has meaning for us. I mean, language is healing. If you don't have the right language of healing, if you don't have the trim tab of the alphabet, there's no way that you can write the chapter of healing for you. So I'm incredibly fastidious and selective when it comes to the language that I use. You know, you look at, I love the other languages, such as French or Spanish. You know, in Spanish, you don't say, "I am hungry." You say, yo tengo hambre. You say, "I have hunger." So when patients say, "I'm depressed," or, you know, I am this, I usually just invite them to consider that perhaps that's really not accurate. And I love guest house. Rumi's guest house, you know, of being human. What does it mean to be human? That we have all these guests that they come in, you know, different thoughts, different feelings, different emotions. And that's what they are. They're guests that they're coming in and they're teaching us and they're polishing us and they're helping us to be able to evolve and to move forward. So language is healing, you know?
Yeah, I find that when you say I have cancer or I am sick, you're affirming to yourself the very thing that you don't want, right?
Absolutely. You're creating what's referred to as morphic resonance physiologically inside. You are commanding for your physiology to be stuck a certain way. You're creating, you know, if you would, you're creating a limiting factor for yourself. Language is everything. And I think, you know, it's not a coincidence that whenever patients are going for a second opinion to see a consultant, one of the things that I ask them to do is to record the conversation. Ask them. You know, when you're going to see another consultant, just ask, "Listen, would it be okay with you if I could record our conversation?" And always take another person. And take a notepad. The other person is writing down, well, what was that language? What was that word that you used? What does it mean? You know, explore, be engaged. After all, healing is an artwork. You know, this is what you're on. And they're coming in and they're giving you the tools that you need for you to be able to put it together and to create your masterpiece, the legacy that you want to leave behind that is called healing.
And don't you say something about the power of the human imagination, the mind, is much more powerful than any pill?
Well, you're right. Einstein was absolutely accurate. Einstein said it. Imagination, right? Knowledge is limited. Imagination is not, right? Imagination, if we can imagine it. Now, I don't want to give the impression that you could just sit on your couch and you could just visualize and imagine yourself to healing. No, an artist doesn't do that. An artist, they take on their skill set. They're out there, they're practicing it. You know, they don't look at it like, oh my God, why have you forgotten me? Why is this happening to me? You're out there, you're like, wow, okay. Let me pay attention to what I'm eating. How am I eating? Is it important for me to increase my green leafy vegetables? Is it important for me to decrease my animal product? Well, am I hydrated? I mean, most human beings, they're unaware that one of the number one causes of hypertension, high blood pressure, is dehydration. Right now, as we're talking, we're dehydrating ourselves because every time that you speak, you're evaporating water. And, you know, and this thing, it's 80 to 85% water. So, you know, paying attention to being hydrated. If you live a stressful life, just, you know what, take a sabbatical. It's okay. Take a sabbatical, come back, call it the healing sabbatical, and reflect, be reflective. If you live in a constellation that there is anger, there is resentment, there is sarcasm, there is pushback, sit down and be honest and have a larger conversation and create a new relationship, a new constellation through the power of language. Most human beings, they don't realize what a powerful tool it is. The greatest vitamin, the greatest intravenous vitamin, the greatest medication, it's right here. It's the way that we speak. Most importantly, the way we speak with ourselves inside. It's not a coincidence that when you look at autoimmune diseases, there is a gender predilection of 10 to 1. 10 women for every man. They're getting autoimmune diseases such as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, rheumatoid factor, lupus, and how could this be? Because our society is conducive to that. Most women that they come, I mean, I've had the privilege of caring for some of the most incredible human beings. Women, when they come in, the conversations that they're having with themselves. I'm not good enough. I'm not good mother. I'm not mother. It's this deep, chronic sense that we're not good enough. That is the terrain that creates dis-ease and sickness. And we can shift and change that through language.
And it's so interesting because autoimmune, sometimes doctors will label it autoimmune and it's a mystery. They don't really know what's going on. They just see that your body is attacking itself in one way. But the 10 to 1 ratio with women, I mean, women beat themselves up mentally.
Yes.
So it starts with the woman attacking themselves,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
In a way.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
So self-love in those instances will be pretty beneficial.
You're absolutely right. And you know what? Again, as I said, every human being on the planet, they're doing the best that they know how. This is not about anyone doing it wrong or they're less than or they should do it better. You know, healing is a developmental process, psycho-spiritually speaking. See, sometimes we get disease, sometimes we get sick, because that's the only way that will slow down this madness of modern life, that we can actually cocoon back in for a new metamorphosis to occur. You know, we grow wings, the way we see things. I mean, I couldn't even spell love before my cancer. You know, I wanted to become a neuro-ophthalmologist. I was very goal-oriented. I wanted to become a surgeon. I wasn't really that pleasant. And frankly, cancer was one of the best things ever happened to me because it cut me open and it just allowed a different consciousness to be cultivated. Every disease, and I know this as a physician, every disease has the potential to do that, to create an evolutionary process for all of us. Look at the mystery. 7.85 billion people are on a tennis ball that's rotating around itself and around a giant ball that's 1 million times larger. We know that.
Huh.
Yeah, and we're still referring to it as sunrise and sunset. It's a misnomer. Sun is not moving, Earth is rising. Earth is setting. And I think it's about time for our medical model to really clean up our linguistic abstraction that we call medicine and turn a lot of poetry of healing into it.
Woo! So for that person that's in the throes of pain, depression, or just faced, just heard they got this really terminal, fearful diagnosis, what is your one takeaway message on healing that you can leave them with to inspire them?
I love you. God bless you. Peace be still. You're not being punished. What you're going through is an important step, an important aspect of maturation. Every human being on the planet at some point in their lives will go through it. Just that. Because it's very easy to really want to give a recipe of eat this way, do that. But really, truly, it's to get people to stop and to realize that there is such a thing as cranial nerve zero, and we can activate it. And we activate it by looking up. We activate it by certain way of journaling, Pew 12. We activate it by hugging people and receiving hug. We activate it by taking our shoes, socks off and walking on the beach. We activate it by getting a kite and just looking at the kite and realizing that it shifts and changes. And sometimes the wind comes and it goes a little higher, and sometimes it comes down, going out and just looking at children. That's what I invite you to do, realizing that you're a child of God, that you're an important aspect of this ecosystem that's referred to as Earth, that you're an important aspect and your life matters and you matter. And you've done nothing to cause this. This is just a journey, and you will be okay, and you'll go through this.